Most people think power is loud. They imagine it as a voice that fills a room, a hand that lands on a table, a name that gets repeated until everyone else starts saying it too. They think power announces itself. But real power often does the opposite. It stays quiet, it waits, and it survives precisely because no one thinks to look for it. In that office building downtown, the kind with glass walls and carefully framed mission statements in the lobby, there was a woman almost no one remembered by name. Not because she caused problems, not because she was unfriendly, but because she never asked to be noticed. Her name was Margaret. To most people, she was simply the woman who cleaned the floors at night, the one who appeared after meetings ended, or the one who emptied trash bins filled with half-finished coffee cups and printed agendas no one would ever read again, the one who wiped fingerprints from glass walls and straightened chairs that had been pushed back without a second thought. Margaret arrived every evening at exactly 9:47. Not early, not late, always precise. Precision was one of the few things in her life she still controlled. She signed in at the security desk with calm, deliberate handwriting, nodded politely to the guard, and pushed her cleaning cart toward the service elevator. At night, the building felt different. During the day, it hummed with confidence. People walked fast, spoke fast, and acted as if they were always headed somewhere important. At night, all of that faded. The lights dimmed, the air grew heavier, and in the silence stopped feeling empty. It felt honest. Margaret preferred the building this way. She moved slowly through the hallways, not because she was tired, but because she had learned something important. When you move slowly, people stop paying attention to you. And when people stop paying attention, they start behaving like themselves. Voices drifted through open doors, conversations softened, worries slipped out. Margaret didn't interrupt. She didn't react. She didn't look up. She simply existed in the space, and information appeared on its own. Years earlier, Margaret had worked in an office like this. She had once worn pressed jackets instead of a uniform. She had once carried a laptop instead of a mop. She had once believed that doing good work would be enough to protect her place. Life changed quietly. Her husband's illness didn't arrive with drama, just a tiredness that never went away, appointments that turned into tests, conversations spoken in careful voices. Margaret tried to keep everything else normal. She kept working, she kept smiling, she kept meeting expectations, until normal slowly became impossible. No one fired her outright. Instead, responsibilities shifted, projects were reassigned, her name appeared less often in emails. Then one afternoon, she heard the phrase that ended everything. "We're restructuring." It sounded clean, reasonable. She nodded, packed her desk slowly, and left without making anyone uncomfortable. Cleaning work wasn't what she had imagined for herself, but it paid the bills, and more importantly, it didn't ask her to pretend she was fine when she wasn't. So she adapted. She learned routines. She learned which buildings felt safe. She learned how to disappear in plain sight. Disappearing, she discovered, was a skill. Margaret noticed patterns. Which floors emptied first, which offices stayed lit late into the night, which conference rooms were used for real decisions and which were just for show. At first, she trusted her memory, but memory faded. So she began carrying a small notebook in her cart. Most of it was practical reminders: replace a light bulb, report a broken lock, clean a spill. But sometimes she wrote other things: dates, times, room numbers. No opinions, no accusations. Margaret believed in facts. Feelings were easy to dismiss. Facts had weight. So on the executive floor was always the quietest. The carpet was thicker. the chairs heavier, the walls decorated with framed statements about integrity and leadership. Margaret cleaned those floors last. She understood something most people didn't. Decisions made in quiet rooms carried the loudest consequences. One night, she entered a conference room she cleaned every week and noticed something slightly off. The chairs were aligned too perfectly. The table was polished, but there was a faint indentation where papers had rested for hours. And on the surface, barely visible, was a date written lightly in ink. The date was in the future. Margaret paused, not alarmed, just attentive. She finished cleaning the room and left it exactly as she found it. The next night, the room was locked early, unusual. The night after that, it was open again. The air smelled faintly of fresh paper. That was when she saw the folder. It sat on the table, thick, neatly placed, labeled with that same future date. Margaret didn't touch it right away. She cleaned the rest of the room first, aligned the chairs, polished the glass. Only then did she return to the table. Inside the folder were documents arranged with precision, budget plans, approvals, signatures already scanned and placed at the bottom of pages. One signature caught her attention. It was dated, even though the meeting it referred to had not yet happened. Margaret understood immediately what she was looking at. Not something illegal, not something dramatic. Preparation. A contingency plan designed to shift responsibility if something failed. What written before the outcome was even known. She felt no anger, just clarity. Margaret closed the folder and took out her notebook. She wrote exactly what she could prove: the date, the time, the room number, the folder label, the names on the document, and one line that mattered most. Signature dated before meeting. She placed the folder back exactly where she found it and finished her shift. Over the next few days, the building changed. Voices lowered, doors closed more often, printers ran late into the night, shred bins filled faster than usual. Then the audit arrived quietly. No announcement, just polite emails requesting records and schedules. One evening, a woman Margaret had never seen before stopped her in the hallway and asked if she remembered cleaning that conference room on a specific night. Margaret nodded. When asked why she remembered the folder, she answered calmly, "Because it wasn't supposed to be there yet." She handed over her notebook without hesitation. The pages spoke for themselves. Margaret wasn't asked many questions after that. A week later, she was invited to sit in a meeting, not to clean it, to attend it. She wore her uniform, sat quietly, and spoke only when asked to. There was no apology, no speech, no dramatic moment. Things simply shifted. Responsibilities were corrected, decisions reassigned, and certain people stopped making choices they should never have made alone. Margaret returned to work that night as usual, pushing her cart down the hallway, the notebook resting where it always had. People noticed her differently now. Not with admiration, with awareness. And that was enough. Because being quiet had never meant being powerless. Sometimes it meant being prepared, and sometimes the most important voice in the room was the one that never needed to raise itself at all. The next night, the building didn't feel relieved. It felt careful. People still walked the same hallways. They still spoke to the same colleagues, but their voices were lower now. Conversations ended sooner than usual. Doors closed more often, and for the first time, Margaret noticed something she had never seen before. People were no longer acting like they had nothing to hide. They were acting like they had something to remember. After that meeting, nothing in the building returned to the way it had been before. From the outside, everything looked the same. The lobby lights still came on at the same hour every morning. The elevators still chimed softly as they opened, People still arrived with coffee cups in their hands and confidence in their steps. But inside, something had shifted. Margaret felt it the first night she returned to work after being asked to attend the meeting. She pushed her cart through the lobby at 9:47, signed in at the desk, nodded to the guard, and headed toward the service elevator as she always had. No one stopped her. No one spoke to her. Yet the air felt different. Not heavier, more alert. On the lower floors, people spoke more carefully. Conversations ended when doors opened. Laughter came later, softer, or as if people were unsure who might be listening now. Margaret didn't change her routine. She never did. She cleaned the same floors in the same order, wiped the same glass walls, emptied the same bins. But she noticed the subtle things: who avoided certain hallways, who stayed later than usual, who suddenly stopped staying late at all. She noticed that some names stopped appearing on office doors. Desks were cleared quietly, often overnight. Plants disappeared. Personal photos vanished without explanation. No farewell emails, no announcements, just absence. Margaret wrote nothing down about those departures, not because they didn't matter, but because absence spoke loudly enough on its own. One evening, as she finished cleaning a conference room on the executive floor, she overheard two voices outside the glass wall, and they hadn't noticed her yet. "This never should have gotten that far," one voice said. "We didn't think anyone would notice," the other replied. There was a pause. "Well," the first voice said, quieter now, "someone did." Margaret continued wiping the table, her movement steady, unhurried. The voices drifted away. She didn't write that conversation down either. She didn't need to. She already knew what it meant. For the first time since she had started working in that building, people were no longer speaking freely around her. They were speaking around the idea of her. And that, she understood, was more powerful than recognition. Over the following weeks, Margaret was asked to attend 2 more meetings, always politely, always without explanation. She never spoke unless addressed directly. She answered questions the same way she always had, calmly, precisely, without interpretation. She did not offer opinions. She did not speculate. She simply stated what she knew to be true. At one meeting, someone asked her how long she had been keeping her notes. Margaret thought for a moment. "Long enough to recognize patterns," she said. No one followed up on that. They didn't need to. Something else began to happen. People started asking her questions outside of meetings. Quiet questions, careful ones. "Do you remember when this project actually started? Were you working that night? Did you notice who stayed late that week?" Margaret answered only what she could confirm, and when she couldn't confirm something, she said so. "I don't know," she would reply. "I didn't write that down." Those words became boundaries. People respected boundaries when they understood they were real. One evening, the woman from the audit, the one who had first asked about the conference room, found Margaret near the supply closet. "Do you ever regret not saying something sooner?" she asked. Margaret paused, considering the question. "No," she said. "Sooner wouldn't have helped." The woman frowned slightly. "How do you know?" "Because people only hear the truth when they're ready to be held accountable," Margaret replied. "Before that, it just sounds like noise." The woman nodded slowly. "I think you're right," she said. Margaret returned to her work. That night, she cleaned a floor she had never cleaned before. It wasn't higher. It wasn't more important. It was different. The office belonged to a department that had recently been restructured. New leadership. New expectations. New uncertainty. Margaret noticed how the desks were arranged closer together now, how personal items were fewer, how people seemed hesitant to leave anything behind. Fear, she knew, made people tidy. She cleaned carefully, aware that these were people standing where she had once stood, trying to look indispensable, trying not to be seen as a problem. She felt no resentment toward them, only understanding. As weeks passed, the building settled into a new rhythm. Not calmer, more deliberate. Processes changed. Approvals took longer. Meetings included more people. Decisions were documented more thoroughly. Margaret noticed the difference immediately. Where once documents had appeared early, now they appeared late. Where once responsibility drifted, now it was anchored. Her notebook grew thinner. Not because she stopped writing, but because there was less to record. One evening, the head of facilities stopped her in the hallway. "I wanted to let you know," he said, shifting slightly. "We're creating a new role." Margaret waited. "It's informal for now," he continued, "but we'd like you to help review overnight logs, incident reports, things like that. You notice things others don't." Margaret nodded. "I can do that," she said. The role didn't come with a title. It didn't come with an office. It came with access. And Margaret understood the difference. She didn't tell anyone about the change. She simply began doing the work. She reviewed logs, compared them to her notes, flagged discrepancies quietly. Not everything she flagged led to action, but everything she flagged was acknowledged. That mattered. As months passed, Margaret's routine changed slightly. She spent more time reading than cleaning now, but she still kept her cart, still wore her uniform. She liked the way it grounded her. People spoke to her more often, but still carefully. They didn't joke around her. They didn't underestimate her. They listened. One night, long after the building had emptied, Margaret stood by a window on the executive floor and watched the city lights below. She thought about the version of herself who had once believed power looked like being heard. She smiled faintly. Power, she had learned, looked more like being accurate. It looked like patience. It looked like memory. It looked like someone paying attention when others were too busy protecting themselves to notice what they were leaving behind. Margaret closed her notebook and placed it back in her cart. She turned off the lights in the hallway one by one. And as the building slipped into darkness, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not revenge, alignment. She hadn't risen above anyone. She had simply returned to where she had always belonged, at the center of the truth.